Will Optus' unmetered Netflix mobile streaming sink its network?
And should you be excited about Android N?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Alcatel.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by a man who's already in training for the Tokyo Olympics. I'll read that again. By a man who's already in training to sit on the couch drinking Asahi during the Tokyo Olympics, Adam Turner. We're also joined by Fairfax online technology editor Tim Biggs. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Adam, what's new in tech?
Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak has offered his 2 cents on rumours that the headphone jack will be missing on the iPhone 7, warning that it's going to tick a lot of people off and that he personally won't use Bluetooth. If Apple does ditch the headphone jack, it may include an adapter for attaching headphones to the iPhone's Lightning port, or it might just sell them as an optional extra.
Following the earthquake in Italy earlier this week, Optus, Virgin Mobile and Telstra have announced that calls to fixed line or mobile phones into Italy will be free on their networks. Telstra's free deal will run for a week, while Optus and Virgin Mobile will offer free calling for a fortnight.
Adultery dating website Ashley Madison was hacked due to inappropriate security safeguards, according to a joint investigation by the Australian and Canadian Privacy Commissioners. The details of approximately 36 million accounts were stolen last year, with unfaithful spouses shocked to discover that the internet can't be trusted to keep a secret.
Microsoft's latest publicity stunt for its Xbox One console is the Xbox Onesie, which is exactly what you might think it is, and words alone cannot do this thing justice. Microsoft says it's only producing the Xbox Onesie in limited quantities, with some set to be given away as prizes via social media. So Adam, Apple says, or the rumour says that Apple says, I should say, that it's time to ditch the headphone jack for the upcoming iPhone 7. Is this a piece of Apple genius or a really terrible idea?
No, this does not sit well with me. And I know we go through this every time Apple decides to ditch something and everybody jumps up and down and says it's terrible. And then a few years later people say, oh, it wasn't so bad. But it was so bad if you relied on that. And everybody uses headphones. The whole hipster argument, oh, but headphone jack is old, why do you need that now? Because it still bloody works, and it's a nice coincidence that Apple just happens to sell wireless headphones and now it wants to get rid of the headphone jack.
What do you think, Tim?
I'm trying really hard to care either way, but to be quite honest, I don't. And I don't use an iPhone. I suppose if my phone was to drop the headphone jack, I would use an adapter, and I can't imagine it would bother me that much. I have to say, if I wanted to use my existing headphones, I'd be quite happy to slap an adapter on there and plug it into the Lightning port.
I think the problem is that you'd need to have a few adapters, because I know with headphones I've got half a dozen of them. You know, a pair lives on my desk, a pair on my bag, a pair in the kitchen, and so wherever I need them I know I've got some. To only have one adapter and realise I've left that at home or upstairs or whatever would drive me crazy, and I shouldn't have to buy a dozen of the damn things just because Apple feels like getting rid of a feature.
The other problem there, though, is Bluetooth itself has a level of unreliability, and depending on what you're listening to, depending on how the app has been coded, because I've had this happen to me. I've used Bluetooth headphones. They can be very, very convenient. There's some very nice models out there, including models not made by Apple. And when they drop out, sometimes it'll intelligently go, oh, that's like having a headphone unplugged. I'll pause the music or I'll pause the podcast or whatever you're listening to. And sometimes it'll just go, no, it's time to let the train know exactly what you've been listening to and why.
Yeah.
Which is really annoying.
I think
it's genuinely irritating.
Woz was making the same point, that he didn't think that Bluetooth on the iPhone was up to it. And if they want to do this, the first thing they need to do is actually sort out Bluetooth on the iPhone.
Of course, you're not obliged to buy an iPhone 7 if you feel so strongly about it.
No, you can't say that. You'll ruin Apple's business model. What are you, some kind of commie? Everyone knows you've got to go out and buy the new one straight away, even though the old ones still work. It will be interesting to see whether this is a big enough issue for, you know, the sheeple to actually say, you know what, I might stick with my old one, or whether they just swallow the story of, you know, headphone jacks yesterday's news and still buy one. I would love to see this iPhone actually flop because of this. I would love to see Apple finally learn its lesson that you can't just treat people like idiots and expect them to spend money because you want to get rid of something.
This is, of course, avoiding the real killer question of the week, which is, would any of us wear an Xbox Onesie in public?
Define public.
Yeah.
Where somebody else can see you.
Yes.
Oh,
It doesn't matter if you're...
I've done
It
that
doesn't
already.
matter if you're doing it
You've
otherwise.
done that already.
Yeah, I was wearing one last night.
Oh, I'd be worried that Microsoft would like break it with a firmware update while I was out somewhere and I wouldn't be able to get home.
Well, it'll definitely require a good patch if you stretch it out too far, I'd say.
Did you have to wait and download a 4 gig update before you could leave home?
No. I must say though, it is comfortable in a kind of infantilizing way that makes you afeared for the future of humankind. It's not something that I would wear in public per se any more than I'd wear pajamas in public. But to each their own.
There you go, people. Tim Biggs more prepared to use a Microsoft Xbox Onesie than an iPhone.
So, Adam, Optus has said that it's making Netflix and Presto streaming free for its mobile customers, but there are some catches there, right?
Yeah, well, firstly, they use this term data-free, which is really confusing. What they actually mean is unmetered. And I think unmetered is a pretty common term these days. People understand what unmetered means. When they say you're going to be watching Netflix data-free, is that like what, you'll send it to me via smoke signals? I think they're confusing the issue there. But it's not free for everybody. It's free for everybody who spends a lot on their phone. If your if your Optus mobile plan is under $100 a month, then you've still got to pay an extra $10 if you want Netflix and Presto to be unmetered. But all of their new plans, whether or not it's above or below that 100 threshold, get unmetered iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play Music, and Pandora. And I think the EPL might also be unmetered. So it's great news, assuming that the person next to you isn't also using it, because I'm not convinced necessarily that Optus's network is going to handle everybody watching Netflix on the way to work.
Yeah, well, the music streaming thing's interesting in that that's something they did for prepaid some time back, and it was not really clear why they hadn't done it for postpaid. But you're probably right. Tim, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's probably just a matter of setting people's expectations. Like, I assume that most customers don't have, a Netflix and a Presto and a Google Music subscription or whatever. They've got their one thing that they want to use. And as long as they're not trying to use it in a peak hour train, which never works, I think it's probably good in that it gives people access to use this stuff, whereas they would usually blow out their data cap within a day if they tried.
But that is when they're going to try and use it. Most people can't sit down and watch Netflix at work. They're going to try and use it on the way to work. They're going to try and use it at lunchtime, and they're going to try and use it on the way home, just like everybody else in the city. So I for someone who's been fighting for the last couple of years to restore people's faith in their mobile network, I'm not necessarily convinced it's the kick in the guts that they need.
It's certainly a pretty ballsy move.
Yes, I mean, that's one word for it.
Look, to take a slight devil's advocate position on it, though, even if you did end up having to pay for it, so you pay them your $10 per month.
Yeah.
That's the price of an extra gig of data. You've actually only got to watch an hour or so's worth of what is admittedly standard def, and this is one of the other limitations. It's standard def only, no HD, no 4K. But you've only got to watch about an hour of that, and you're actually ahead.
Yeah, it's
so
a good
it'd only
deal.
have to work once in that whole month, basically.
So if you let you down 29 days of the year, you still shouldn't feel hard done by. Is that what you're telling me? 29 days of the month.
As I said, slight devil's advocate position, but
you're right. In terms of value
from a
for
financial
money,
standpoint.
Yeah. In terms of value for money, it definitely adds up. But in whether or not it will actually deliver on its promises is a whole different story. Tim, are you watching Netflix are you a streaming during the day kind of guy?
No, I pay for Google Play Music, which also has YouTube Red included, so I will download my YouTube videos to watch them offline on my way to work so that I don't have to stream them. But I'd say this Optus deal is probably decent, at least for the audio streaming. I think they'd probably stand up a bit better than something like Netflix or Presto.
But the problem is, even if you're not using it, you might be just using the Optus network for whatever you're normally going to use it. But if every other schmuck in the train carriage is using it, then your performance is going to suffer as well. So it will be interesting to see what impact it has on network performance as a whole. Because like you say, I'd be fairly confident that if it was just streaming music, that most people would be okay. But my streaming music might not be any good if everyone around me is trying to watch Daredevil. I'm not convinced that only having SD is a problem when you're on a mobile device, though. Sitting on the train with a 4 or 5 inch screen.
Adam, I think I agree with you on SD itself not being a problem, although there's a slight catch there because they don't support things like Google Casting or AirPlay. If you do that out to your TV, you are using quota. They will charge you for that. They've said as much. And I guess the thing is, there are figures out there. Presto had a survey probably about 6 months ago, I think it was, where they actually said, oh, look, we're actually seeing a really big uptake of people doing streaming on their morning commute. So people are already doing this. And I guess it does depend on your given network connections. To get totally anecdotal, I will avoid trains in the morning if I see they're absolutely packed and teeming with people. Not just because I'd like to be able to sit down, I've got a reasonably lengthy train ride, but mostly because I realise, right, as soon as I get on that train, my chances of doing anything online plummet to zero just because of the number of people. Whereas if I can get a reasonably empty-ish train, yeah, I can do that. And I do see people already doing this. This is just, I don't think Optus is necessarily going to sell a whole bunch of customers on just this, but it's a nice little addition to have, and I guess it's a big challenge to Telstra and Vodafone too.
Yeah, but if their whole network falls over it, and they've got no one to blame but themselves.
Yes, equally, it could be a disaster of Vodafone proportion.
Yes. All right, Alex, we're finally getting a taste of Android Nougat. The N is for Nougat. Is this something worth getting excited about?
Well, that very much depends on the Android device that you've got at the moment. As has always been the case, the first devices to get Android N are Google's own Nexus devices, and really specifically the Nexus devices that they put out late last year or this year, pretty much. It's the 6P, the 5X, the 6, the 9, the Pixel C, and there's an Android One phone in there that I don't think anyone in Australia actually owns, are the eligible devices right now. And even then, they're kind of staggering them because the carriers have to test them. So there's actually a pretty small pool of people who can get them. But I've been testing it out from the beta and through into the final version. And look, it's an interesting release for all sorts of reasons. But a bit like iOS 10, an awful lot of what's actually happening is going on under the hood. It's performance improvements, it's battery improvements, it's things maybe not crashing quite so much, because they still do, and that's endemic to any software, I think. But the kind of top line, the features where you go, oh, there's a new thing that I can do, well, you're going to have to hunt and peck for them, because there's not all that many. There's a split screen mode, which actually works surprisingly well and is now baked into Android. That's actually potentially quite a big deal if you're using an Android tablet, probably a bit less so for smaller screen Android phones and even mid-sized screen things like 6P. For example, you can do it, but I'm not too convinced too many people will. Other manufacturers have had that kind of thing, so Samsung's had that, LG's had a version of that, but for both of them, the experience has always been, look, here's this handful of apps that will work with this, but nothing else is supported. In this case, because it's baked into Android, in theory, everything works. In practice, it's a bit hit and miss if you try and run a game and a web browser at the same time, for example. But there are things that can be done there. Yeah.
So, Tim, you're an Android man then, I assume. What are you packing?
At the moment, I'm using a Sony Xperia X Performance. And I will note that if you have a Sony or a Samsung phone, especially if you got it from Telstra, you are going to be waiting a long time to get Android Nougat if history is anything to go by. But I mean, I've been using N for a bit on my 6P, and it's fine. I don't think you're missing out on too much. Like Alex already said, a lot of the stuff, your Vulkan APIs and your JIT compilers, they're all under the hood. You're not going to notice them that much. And a lot of the new Android stuff is things we've already seen from Samsung, from Sony, stuff like the split screen mode, stuff like, even weird things like you can put a different picture on your lock screen as your home screen, which everyone can do apparently, except Nexus devices sort of, put that in there now. yeah, it's an evolution. It's not anything revolutionary.
Do you think we've got to the point now, pretty much with iOS and Android, that we're mainly only getting these little incremental upgrades, and it's honed enough that they're unlikely to just blow the whole thing away and drop something completely new on you?
Sure, I think what Google really wants to do now is make a concerted effort to do what Samsung and Sony and all the other vendors, want in the first place, so they can get to a place where they're like Apple, where they can just say, here's the update, and everyone can get it, and you don't have to wait 6 months for it. And then maybe we'd start to see something that's, a little more interesting.
I'm keen to see the Daydream VR stuff that they were showing off at the developer conference earlier in the year. That's supposed to work with N, and there's been talk that we might see it in the next couple of weeks. So to me, that's maybe the most exciting thing about N.
Well, VR is the hype word of this year, but VR disappointment is often the reality,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to smartphone-based stuff.
Oh yeah,
So, I'm hopeful, but my inner cynic keeps kind of chipping away at the inside of my head and saying, it'll be rubbish.
Yeah, no, I don't expect it to be as good as the Oculus Rift. Or I had to play with the HoloLens last week or so, and that's really impressive for something that's not even really a consumer-grade device at the moment. I don't expect it to be anywhere near that, but it will be still interesting to see what they do with it and how they, take the idea of cardboard and sort of expand it to the next level. Tim, are you much of a VR man and had to play with many of the headsets?
Yeah, I've had to play with plenty of them. I would say for most people, the PlayStation VR is probably going to hit a sweet spot of affordability and, competency.
Yeah.
A lot of the smartphone stuff I find very hit and miss. The good stuff requires, external hardware or, something fancy like a dual camera, array that isn't in most smartphones. So I think the future of smartphone VR is probably fairly gimmicky, but who knows? I mean, Google could pull something surprising out that would, shut us all up.
Well, that just about wraps it up for another episode of Vertical Hold. Remember, if you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page. Thanks, Tim, for joining us for the show.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Alcatel.